Welcome, John.
Thank you, Phil.
You've had a stellar career, many years at PP&L, in a whole variety of positions, leading to many years of international experience, which is what we're going to talk about today. Why don't you share some of your background?
My international experience actually started when I was 16 years old. I was selected to be an exchange student. It was a Rotary program. I had studied German for 4 years in high school, and when asked what country I wanted to go to, I obviously said Germany or Switzerland or Holland or some country with a Germanic language. For some strange reason, they sent me to Argentina. And so after a year in Argentina, I came home completely fluent. And during my career at PPL, I rose through the ranks, various positions of responsibility, negotiated a very large co-sourcing contract with EDS. From that, I created the first project management office at PPL, wrote a project management methodology, still in use at PPL, and then was the technology manager for a very large project that lasted for approximately 5 years. It ended coincidentally in 1999, which coincided with the year that PPL purchased 7 distribution companies in Latin America. And PPL Global, the international arm of PPL at the time, came to the IT department and asked for someone to manage IT in Latin America. I was available, I had the skills, I had the experience, and through sheer luck, I was fluent in Spanish. And so I first went down to Santiago, Chile. It was a mission to assess the IT maturity of the various companies that PPL had purchased, and thus began a nearly 10-year career as the manager of IT in all of PPL Global's international operations, with 4 CIOs reporting to me and my reporting to the CIO of PPL.
So John, you're now president of Management and Vision. Tell us a little bit about that company.
After PPL sold its international companies in around 2008, 2009, I left PPL because I was so addicted to international business that to sit in an office in Allentown, Pennsylvania and not have the opportunity to travel was unacceptable. So I then went to work for a company called Computer Aid International, which is a IT services and product company based in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. And in that capacity, I became responsible for helping Computer Aid grow internationally in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, in the Middle East, and in Africa. Worked in that capacity for 3 years, and then decided I didn't want to work full-time any longer, and I wanted to create my own company, Management and Vision, which is based on my desire to find creative and effective ways to illustrate, to create in a vision format aspects of management, be it project management, program management, or corporate management.
So John, succeeding in international business, there must be other areas of your background that has really prepared you for that. Why don't you share some of that with us?
I lived as an exchange student in Argentina, and I actually graduated from high school there. And for the better part of 10 years, while working as director, manager, CIO of IT operations in Latin America, I lived on and off for several months in Santiago, Chile, in Argentina, and it's always been a component of my background to be empathetic and to be concerned about other cultures and to want to learn as much about them as possible. A lot of it actually started when I was in high school. My parents hosted exchange students from South Africa, from New Zealand, from Mexico, and it became an element of my life. And that has simply prepared me for a role in international business.
So John, in your career working internationally, I'm sure you've sort of figured out what are the critical success factors for succeeding in international business. Have you done that?
Indeed, Phil, I have. What I would like to do is just read it from a number of a few notes that I've made here. There are certain business skills that are required for anyone to be successful in business, regardless of whether it's in the United States or internationally. Basic business skills. And they include things such as business knowledge, expertise in your respective discipline, whatever that happens to be, basic understanding of business finance and accounting, supervisory skills, presentation, communication skills, leadership skills, project management, program management, near and dear to my heart, negotiations, marketing, sales. I mean, those are things that everyone needs, regardless of whether it's international or not. In addition to the basic business skills, there are basic social skills that one has to have, such as respect and trust and integrity and character, passion, sensitivity, creativity, discipline, humor, which again I think is absolutely vital to success in business. In addition to those, to succeed in international business, there are additional skills such as international economics, international finance, and international accounting, which is above and beyond what you would learn or have to learn to do business in the United States. And then a large number of items that we group together under the umbrella phrase of culture. Language, ethnic background, history, geography, a sense of time, how you greet people, the way you dress in different cultures, and finally, international business practices.
John, you often talk about four critical dimensions that are required to be a successful international business leader. Could you talk about the four and provide some examples of each?
Certainly, Phil. As I mentioned, the first set are basic skills that anyone ought to have, anyone should develop throughout one's career, including basic business skills, basic knowledge of the business, leadership, communication, project management, negotiation, etc. Including basic social skills, such as strength of character, ability to work in a team situation, sensitivity, creativity, integrity. Those are skills that are absolutely core. Now, with respect to international business, there are three major groupings of additional characteristics that a person has to have, has to develop in order to be effective. The first of these, international economics and finance or accounting, includes things such as the difference between generally accepted accounting practices in the US and GAAP practices that are different in other countries. And that's absolutely vital when doing business in other countries in terms of clearly being in compliance with the law, but also in terms of making money. There are laws that have been passed by the United States, such as Sarbanes-Oxley, which impose significant accounting and recording requirements on U.S. companies doing business abroad. And it's important for one to understand what they are and to ensure compliance with them. One has to understand exchange rates. One has to understand the concept of hedging and understand the local cost of living so that you clearly understand what a local appropriate wage is for a particular skill so that you're not either overpaying or underpaying or mispricing your product so that you're not making money in a local environment. There are taxation issues. United States companies doing business in other countries are faced with local taxes. In some cases, they're very high, and you have to realize that in order to be competitive in those environments, you have to take that taxation into account and be that much more effective than your competition locally. Otherwise, you simply won't make any money. And that involves things such as treaties between those countries and the United States. There are free trade agreements that have to be understood and factored into the cost of doing business and the way you do business in other countries. You have to understand what comprises or constitutes a local taxable presence. And before you begin to do business, you have to understand whether you are going to be subject to local taxes or not. And then there are things such as hiring and firing people in other countries. In many countries around the world, there are mandatory 13th, 14th, even 15th month salary pays that you have to give to people. You have to understand, for example, in some countries there are rice subsidies that are mandatory to pay to your employees. You have to understand that there are severance packages that are required, and the difficulty of getting a poor performing employee off your payroll in certain countries. So those are just some of the international economic and finance or accounting issues that one has to master to be effective in other countries.
You talk about culture as really being a very critical component as a success factor in managing internationally. Help us understand why that's so important.
Culture is critical. It is, in my opinion, the one aspect of international business leadership that can't really be taught. I think sensitivity to another culture is an innate characteristic that a person either has or does not. I hope I'm wrong, but in my experience, that has been what I have learned. Culture consists of a number of key elements. First and foremost is language. Proficiency in a language is your ability to express and defend your opinion. Now, a lot of people learn a rudimentary understanding of a language simply to be able to carry on a conversation. But if you can't express and defend your opinion, you truly have not learned enough of that language to be effective in a business situation. You have to learn that there are in other languages multiple levels of respect. I'm sure you've heard in Spanish the difference between tú and usted. And in fact, there are 3 levels of respect in many Latin American countries. And it's appropriate for you to understand, for anyone to understand, when a particular way of addressing an individual is the appropriate one to use in a given situation. You have to learn the vocabulary of your respective business. If, as in my case, you were part of an electric or power distribution company, you have to understand and learn the vocabulary. And fortunately, there are books you can buy that presume you speak a particular language, but lack the vocabulary of a given discipline. And it's critical to purchase one of those books, to sit down and learn what those words are. And then finally, there are what are called false cognates in language, which are words that we think we understand, but in fact do not. And they can get one into a great deal of trouble. One example is that in English, we use the word compromise. It's the way we enter into negotiations typically. In Spanish, there is no word for compromise. There's a word called compromiso, which we think means compromise, but in fact it means commitment. And so the fact that there's no word for compromise in Spanish factors into the way most people in Latin America enter into the process of negotiation. Other elements of culture are ethnic background. It's important to understand the history of the people, where they come from, what's important to them, what their values are. It's important to understand the history of a country. One interesting example is that in 1879, there was a War of the Pacific, during which Bolivia lost its access to the Pacific Ocean. That land was since taken over by Chile and Peru. Nevertheless, once a year, Bolivia has a day in which they celebrate the Day of the Sea, which is a bit sad because on that day they tend to remember the fact that they lost their access to the ocean, yet it's very important to understand how important that is to the Bolivian people. It's important to understand geography. One perfect example is Chile. Chile is virtually an island in the world. It's isolated on the one side by an ocean, on the other side by the longest mountain range in the world, by the driest desert on the planet. And so it's important to respect that, how important it is for them to have you come to their country. They appreciate the fact that you've gone so far because no one passes through Chile on their way to anywhere else. It is in essence an island unto itself. You have to understand the different concepts of time. In Spanish, there are 3 or 4 different ways of saying now. It's either ahora, which means more or less now. It's ahora mismo, which means really right now, or ahorita, which means absolutely now. And if you're scheduling a meeting or you're scheduling a social event, it's important for you to understand which interpretation of time is the one that is expected of you in a given situation. And then finally, greetings. You have to understand whether it's appropriate to shake hands. You have to understand whether it's appropriate to kiss, men or women, or both, and the number of kisses. For example, in Argentina, it's appropriate to have one kiss on the cheek. In Spain, it's two kisses. And in Brazil, it's three. And so you simply have to learn these things in order to be accepted in the culture. Dress. We tend to dress more casually in the United States than business is conducted in other countries. And it's absolutely vital to respect their way of dress and to dress accordingly, to be taken seriously and to be treated with respect. And then finally, one item I really want to stress is that taxi drivers anywhere in the world are philosophers, and you should listen to them.
John, one of the areas that you talk about as a critical component in managing international business is international business practices. So what do you mean by that, and provide some examples?
Well, specifically, Phil, what I referred to there is things such as decision-making practices in different countries. I mentioned earlier that in Spanish, there really is no direct translation of the word compromise. And so it's important to understand when you begin negotiation with a person in a culture like that, they may not be coming to the table with the same philosophy of negotiation that we have, which is typically, let's try to find a way that we both can win. And so it's a matter of understanding decision and negotiation skills. It's important, absolutely, in my opinion, to establish long-term relationships with business partners. Business truly is done around the world through relationships. And relationships are the result of spending time with people, creating friendships, and being in a relationship for a long term, not appearing to be a company that descends in a country, tries to make a quick profit, and then leaves. You've got to demonstrate a commitment to the local culture, a commitment, a local presence. It's important to understand business styles. Some countries are more formal than we are. Some countries are less formal, and it's appropriate to adapt your style to the local way of doing business. It's absolutely important, in my opinion, never to compromise integrity. In 1977, the United States passed the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which in many ways makes it more difficult for American companies to do business. In essence, it puts handcuffs on us. We can't do business the way that other companies and other countries can, but that's our problem, and it's one we simply have to live with. And under no circumstances should that ever be compromised. And finally, maintain a sense of humor. It's important, in my opinion, to enjoy the journey of business.
John, we all know companies pursue international operations because there's a financial reward. But finding the right leaders to help lead international operations, sometimes there are personal factors as to why people want to do this. So help us understand the personal factors.
In my opinion, you can't force an individual to assume responsibility for doing business internationally. It's difficult. It's taxing on the body. Travel is difficult and getting more difficult every day. Nevertheless, in my experience, there are rewards that far, far outweigh any of the inconvenience or any of the challenges. And those rewards include, number one, friendships. Meeting people in different countries, in different cultures, friendships that truly last a lifetime. Learning about other cultures. To me, that is one of the most rewarding, most satisfying aspects of international business. It gives you a global perspective that most Americans simply do not have. There's an intellectual challenge involved in doing business in other countries, in other cultures, in other languages, that yields a satisfaction that you're doing important work, that you're doing work that is beneficial not only to your company, but to the human species as a whole, that we're shrinking the world and making it a more unified place. You learn language skills not only in other languages, but it improves your ability to communicate in English as well. And then finally, there is personal and professional growth in international business that is above and beyond what one would find doing business only in the United States.
John, in your experience at PP&L, 19 years, you've seen a lot of leaders who manage internationally, including yourself. Do you think leaders are made or are they born?
I know people would disagree with my answer. I believe global managers can be made. They can be taught. They can be taught to be effective. I believe that successful international leaders have an element that they have to be born with. I think there is an inherent empathy for other cultures, an inherent desire to learn from other cultures that is either within a person's character or not. I believe we can train managers and supervisors and people to be effective in running businesses internationally, and there are many programs that do just that. But I think to be an effective international leader, there has to be something in your heart that can only be satisfied by learning from other cultures.
John, you give advice to many young people who are interested in entering international business as a career. How would you summarize the advice that you provide them?
Typically, I advise people to do one of three things, or all three of these three things. The first is by participating in one of the available programs that are dedicated to global business. And in my experience, by far, the best anywhere in the world is the Global Village at the Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University. It is a program that prepares young professionals for a career in international business and entrepreneurship. Second is to volunteer within your company, your organization, for an opportunity to participate, to support international business if your company is already involved in that. The third, and by far the most effective, is by living abroad. Living in another country, in another culture, either as a student or as an intern or as an expat for your company. It is the best way for you to appreciate another culture, another language, and to acquire a truly global perspective. In my experience, global growth can be achieved through one of three ways. The first, and perhaps the easiest, is through acquisition. Purchasing a company in another country gives you immediate access to a local presence, gives you, hopefully, immediate access to a revenue stream, and gives you the ability to hire employees in that local environment. The only downside, of course, is that it requires a capital investment, and there is a certain amount of risk, because in addition to acquiring the assets of the local company, you are potentially acquiring their liabilities and any potential litigation that's pending. And so there's a significant amount of vetting that has to be done. And just as an aside, it's very important, at least in my experience, that an assessment of the IT component of a company should be part of that due diligence process. The intent in many cases is to consolidate the IT operation of an acquired company into that of the acquiring company, and occasionally that process is extraordinarily difficult and expensive, and may be so expensive as to negate the financial advantage of purchasing that company in the first place. There are other situations, however, where the IT operation of a local company is a gold mine, and it may contribute to the profitability of the acquisition. So, although not always included as part of a due diligence process, I strongly recommend that IT be included in that endeavor. The second way to grow internationally is to simply plant a flag in another country, to establish your own legal entity and struggle then to build up a presence. By far the most difficult, and certainly not the one that I would recommend. The third, which is the one that I have been working most with of late, with Computer Aid, CAI in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, is to grow through partnerships, to seek a local partner who has a presence in the country that you're trying to enter, and is willing to work with you, ideally in a synergistic fashion, such that the local partner's products and services complement the products and services of your own company. And when it works, it's a phenomenal relationship, and it's certainly win-win for everybody involved. The challenge, of course, is number one, finding the partner, and number two, nurturing the relationship. It's very time-consuming to do so, but in the long run, it may be the best and least risky way to enter another country, another market. In pursuing a partner, my team and I have developed a new analysis approach that we call DOSE, as in a dose of reality. We've all heard of the SWOT analysis that is used when considering a particular business initiative. DOSE stands for, and not necessarily in the same order, but number one, identify the opportunities that exist between the partner and your own company. Number two, identify the synergies that exist between the two partners. Number three, document the expectations of both partners. And then finally, the D stands for what are the difficulties that you anticipate in the relationship. And in our experience, by going through a formal DOSE analysis of every new potential partner, we've been able to eliminate a lot of wasted time, a lot of time spent on partnerships that in the long run would not have proven to be viable or effective for either partner.
How do you as a leader lead differently during crisis situations?
First of all, I'm personally always taken aback when a crisis situation arises. I tend to think the best of people, and I'm always surprised and a little disappointed when people don't behave either ethically or morally or fairly, and so it's always a challenge for me personally. The most important characteristic in a crisis, obviously, is to maintain a cool head, to think logically, to at best put yourself in the position of the other individual or the individuals that are creating the situation, and try to understand how best to diffuse the situation and move forward. It's never easy. It's never comfortable. It's always a challenge, but certainly with open communication, with a sense of humor, and with a clear head and a logical path forward, that's, in my experience, been the best way to approach a situation.